we look at that, we're talking about people who came there because they wanted to trade and because they wanted to obviously make money from the trade. Um, this is also a chance for a lot of other people to come there who are probably fleeing something. For example, the Jews, the early Jews, the Malabari Jews, uh, they are said to have come from the region of the Middle East, and when, at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple.
Hey, this is a great pleasure for me and having a conversation with esteemed author and educator Tanya Abraham today. And especially today is World Food Day. Am I right, Tanya? This is 16th
right.
of
Yes.
October, and we celebrate as World Food Day. And for me, understanding of food is to celebrate its diversities, because food is something that connect with the multiple diversities. And we have an esteemed author, Tanya. She, if you want a little bit, I will introduce our honorable guest today. She's actually coming from an ancient roots or the background from two different Christian communities of Kerala. And she worked as a journalist for last 15 years, having multiple international and international publication, also working as an art curator, educator, and a writer. She also wrote her previous book on the history and heritage of her own home, that is Fort Kochi. So today we are going to discuss with her a book that is published by Niyogi Books. It's the amazing title, Eating History, Ancient Trade Influenced Cuisines of India. So Tanya, little bit, can you elaborate on this work? Then we will go on with our conversation.
Thank you, Rehan. Yes, of course. Just the way you said that it's all about diversity, and food really is a common language that links people. Irrespective of where you and I may come from, or the history that we may have, it is food that is, easily. It's food that becomes a mode of understanding. And for me, that was a very important aspect of living, especially because I come from a very small town. And this town had a wonderful amalgamation of various cultures, across centuries. And there were communities and religions of various kinds living together. And when I say living together, living very, very harmoniously. And sharing of food was it was a very common thing, especially during festivals like Christmas, or there was, Eid or Bakrid, or whichever it was, might be, the celebration of Passover. Then we were invited to the homes of the Jews and things like that. So, the title Eating with History really talks about how history actually plays a very significant role in the identity of cultures and the identity of food. So that is a very important aspect for me, because I don't think any one of us are who we are. None of us are who we are without the identity of who we were at one time, or what our ancestry is. So that's where the crux of the book came from. And yeah, Rehan, you can ask me any questions.
So for me, what I understand as a reader, as a sincere reader, that this account is a blend of heritage, culture, and diversities that give you a vivid account. Really integrated in a very wonderful manner your own reflective experience, your own upbringing, your own family values, where the culture and cuisine was largely celebrated, and how the South India, or the history of the South India, especially the coastal cities of the Kerala, serve as a melting pot from the time of the Romans, or we can go even further behind it, when the trade routes were established, old spice trade routes. It plays a pivotal role in enriching the culture, and there was exchange, lot of exchanges took place. Many of the communities settled from that time only. And we see the cross-cultural interaction of the Jews, Christians, Arabs, Anglo-Indians, later on Latin Catholics with the local population. And this gives a unique outlook of the cuisine of Kerala. To the people outside the Kerala, I think they will just stereotype it South Indian, or something South Indian cuisine. But in fact, when you read your book account, or somebody who is a food lover, they know that how much diverse is this inside story of this cuisine. So first of all, Tanya, I would like you to reflect a little bit or your own story of upbringing at the Kochi fort, and really your grandmother, whom you reflected it with very kind words, Amama Kusinchia, the Portuguese term you use it, and one addition Malayali word I use, amama, your grandmother. So can you please little bit reflect on your this story? That's a
Yes,
part
sure.
of a book itself and your own story.
Yes, that's the first chapter, Mama's Cuisine. And before I go to that aspect, I'm going to quickly touch upon what you mentioned earlier in terms of South Indian cuisine. We have to remember that when we speak about Kerala, the access to Kerala was largely through the seas. Because of the topography, people couldn't come really from the inlands, but people came to Kerala flying on ships. So that meant a lot of foreign influence that would eventually come. And because we have this wonderful, fantastic, powerful spice trade that brought in a lot of economic gain to the regions, the Rajas were very open to foreign cultures coming in because there was trade and one thing leads to another when we talk about an international port. So we're talking about maybe today's New York, which is or any world capital, which is where Muziris or so-called Muziris was situated, and or Pattanam for that. It's the other name for it. So when we look at that, we're talking about people who came there because they wanted to trade and because they wanted to obviously make money from the trade. This is also a chance for a lot of other people to come there who are probably fleeing something. For example, the Jews, the early Jews, the Malabari Jews, they are said to have come from the region of the Middle East, and when at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple of Solomon. So we're talking about before Christ. That's
Yes.
how far back this could go. And for that matter, all the other religions that plied their way. And I use the word religion largely because religion is something, that is an identity creator in India. And a lot of cultures and traditions and customs are naturally preserved almost organically without much change. We have to worry about this preservation once, the new generation decides not to follow the traditions. And so religion becomes a binding factor in many ways. And that's, in my understanding during my research, this is what I understood, that it is when religion plays a very powerful role in people's lives, certain customs and the way we behave, especially in terms of how we eat and how we share and how we feast and fast, and all those things are held together, right? And in all those things, food plays a very important role. So we're going back to, Mama's Cuisine. For me, it was really a very, it was really the soul of the family, and not just the family, I would say, even the community. And till I was, even during my childhood, I remember the family being very intensely involved in politics. And it was part of the freedom movement and all of those things. So this was like an open kitchen, literally. She had all these staff that were, helping her churn out different kinds of food. And she also experimented. So for me, it was also a space where there was a lot of experimentation going on. And we have to remember that the kitchens in those days were really not attached to the main house. It was an entirely, a different or a separate structure.
You use the term, I think, Tarawad. What do you use in Malayali? You use the term
basically,
Tarawad.
The word Tarawad actually refers to the ancestral homes of certain higher caste people. But in my book, I've just very generally used it because it's a large home, it's a family home, and things like that. So it was generally referred to the higher caste Hindu houses, but in a general outlook in Kerala now, everybody uses that term, and so for an easy understanding, that's why I have used that. The kitchen, of course, was always the pivot upon which everything ran, and the word cuisine is a popular term for kitchen in the regions of Fort Kochi or maybe even Kollam, where the Portuguese found home, or where they lived. So for me, Mama's Cuisine was really where I saw a lot of things, a lot of amalgamation, a lot of expression that happened. And I guess it's also because I was amazed at this woman who would spend hours in the kitchen, dishing out different kinds of things. And there was so much influence from all the communities that lived in and around where we lived, you know. So she would try those cuisines, and we would have things sent over during a festival from another community. And really, there weren't any demarcations. There weren't any differences in terms of religion or community, or there would be people from all kinds of communities turning up at our doorstep. And I think that was largely because the family was very, very much involved in politics, and not the politics of today, but the politics of yesterday, largely. It was an open house. So yeah, I find everything in a home to revolve around food, especially when we look back. I think memories are created from our mother's kitchens or our grandmother's kitchens, and it speaks about families and people and what they share and shared, and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, Tanya, how did these memories transformed into a research, and then research is transformed into a title, what we see today? Can you show our audiences the paperback of your book?
Yes. So
Really,
this is the
it's
book.
wonderful and a catchy title. Yes, very good. Eating with the History, Ancient Trades Influence, Cuisines of Kerala. Thank you, Tanya.
Yes, and this is the back of the book, which has
This
a
is the
map
back.
of
Yeah.
the trade route of the spice trade route. Yeah. So
That
yeah.
is,
So
we say, the signature part of the representation of the book, the ancient spice trade routes. How did it influence the cuisine of Kerala? And my first question, absolutely, how did this research came up?
right. So when we look at Kerala cuisine, it's not just one kind of cuisine, and it's not only the cuisines of the 6 communities I've mentioned. There are other things which are involved, but I've specifically taken what has emerged from the spice trade. From the spice trade and all this foreign influence that landed their anchor on the shores of Kerala, and then here mushroomed all these different kinds of cuisines, some of them which nobody really knew about or know about even today. We don't know that there are 3 different kinds of Christian-based cuisines, and although there is a string of similarity, there is also very distinct differences. So when we speak about the title, of course, eating would be in the present tense as a continuous tense, and it's how we actually flavor the past through something of the present. And history here is really the core of my research, and that came from my love for heritage and culture. And food, of course, it was a weakness for me. Is a weakness, and I really like to watch people being highly creative with food, just like any other creative industry. The industry of food is extremely creative, and it's developing at a very multi-dimensional pace at the moment. But in those days, how did it happen? How did generations preserve this, and do the recipes change from one family to another within the same community? And why did they change from one community to another when the ingredients are similar, the culture is not too different except for religious traditions? And that was an interesting point for me to work within this historical research.
Thank you, Tanya. And this is how the book came up in a shape, collecting your old memories, researching, exploring more, and really that's a point as a history lover, heritage lover, and definitely there is a lot of things, but we cannot discuss every part of our this title. But ancient spice routes, we know the strategic importance of the coastal cities. Definitely, the cultures from the different places used to mix. Even most of the people think that Islam or from that days the contacts with the Arabs started, but no, that's not the case. Even during the time of the Romans, the Middle Easterns controlled the trade, and it was the interaction long before the Islam with the Arabs, and then not only the Arabs, other Middle Eastern communities. This is how the Jewish, I think, this is how the Syrian Christians used to came in the scene of South India. So it is a story of the thousands of years.
Yes, absolutely. History says that the Arabs had a monopoly over trade for a very long time, both in regions of Calicut as well as Kochi, and these were two very prominent ports. the Rajas at that time gave the monopoly to the Arabs. So, we've had Arab influence for a very long time. And the Arabs, of course, stayed here and moved back to the regions of Arabia when the southwest monsoons changed and the ships could ply back. So the time they lived here, they had families here, and they would come back when the winds changed. And it is very natural that even they had families with local women. The tradition and culture of the Arabs would naturally infiltrate local culture. And it's the same thing with the Jews. When the Malabari Jews fled Jerusalem and came, they would actually choose a route which was very popular or very familiar to the trade routes. So it could be Kochi, it could be elsewhere. They say that there are the 12 tribes who left, and one of them could be the ones who turned up in the region of Patna. So yes, that's again a Middle Eastern influence, and then the Syrian Christians have their influence also from the areas of Babylon. Yeah, so that's much before Catholicism came with the Portuguese. So we're again talking about a certain kind of influence that happened. But with the Portuguese coming, a lot of ingredients changed because they brought
Yes,
in a lot
exactly.
of ingredients.
Exactly. That's the point. So today, what is interesting, many things we read it about, we know that many foods item, many fruits, many vegetables has been brought down by the Portuguese. But one of thing that we saw Mosambi or Mosmi from Lahore to Kerala, I think entire South Asia has a juice corners, especially in the summers. And this is really interesting that how Portuguese changed the shape of our eating and food, especially in large subcontinent and especially in context to Kerala. Can you please a little bit reflect on this?
Yes, sure. So the Portuguese came as colonizers. Of course, they came looking for spices and the coveted pepper. Um, but when they came here, they also brought with them a lot of products and ingredients from different parts of the world which they had colonized. So, it could be something from South America, and then you stop by at Mozambique and bring what we call the Mosambi today, which is a fruit. And then they sail to Malacca, or they sail to, other regions of the East. And obviously, there is a transfer of one product or one ingredient to the other. So one of the very strong influences is red chilies. And we had pepper in Kerala, which was largely used. But red chilies, as an extensive ingredient, came in around the 1500s. And that has influenced the Jewish cuisine. It has influenced the Christian cuisine. It has influenced the Arabic cuisine. It's become a very strong part of cuisines which were never there before. And baking also was introduced by the Portuguese. Even steaming, for that matter, we really didn't steam much. Although, when we talk about appam, there are different kinds of appams that are there present in the world today. So even if the appam per se may have existed, we see that mentioned in the Sangam literature. But the appam we're talking about today, it's traced that the influence came with the Jews. And then it was passed and absorbed by the Syrian Christians and made very popular. So that's the historical understanding that we have.
Yeah.
And the use of rice powder. The Portuguese never had rice powder as a product of food in their country. So when they came here, they needed to find uses by which they could actually innovate a new way of cooking so that this could be a part of their staple diet. So the communities which were influenced by the Portuguese, I would say, are all, but very deeply influenced are those who, the Catholics, because the Catholic converts because of the Portuguese arrival. And some of the Portuguese also married local women, and then we have the Anglo-Indian community that emerged. And when we speak about the Anglo-Indian community, it's not like the Anglo-Indians in Calcutta or Mumbai, which tend to have a British lineage, but it's a general term that is used for both the Portuguese as well as the British connect that came about much later in Kerala. So the Portuguese had a very strong influence because of the marrying of women and the strong establishment of Catholicism, which again, is religion. So that played a very pivotal role in how things turned out in terms of food.
Okay, you mentioned many dishes where Portuguese has their signatures on present day context of the cuisine of Kerala. But interesting story of Puttu. Would you like to share that story of Puttu? How this
Yes.
modern day Puttu came up? Yes.
Yes, yes. I saw the comment on your Instagram
Yeah.
this
On
evening.
Twitter also
Yes.
I shared this. Yes, Puttu.
Yeah, so see, we have to remember that steaming was never a part of the way we did something, and of course, a puttu would have been probably innovated and changed, and coconut would have been added later, and things like that. So when the Portuguese came, they had to find a way of using the product, and steaming was a way that travel allowed steaming to be a way of cooking. And we see that the Portuguese also moved to Malacca, and they moved to Sri Lanka, and they moved to all these regions. We also have the string hoppers. We have, the appam, which is found in Sri Lanka, which is exactly the same as what we find here. So it could have gone with the Portuguese. It could even have gone with the Dutch, and that's something which is an element of debate all the time. So even if a cuisine existed earlier, for example, a Jewish cuisine or a Syrian Christian cuisine, there are certain ingredients and techniques which came in later, and then they were absorbed. For example, there were no red chilies. Red
They were
chilies is a
modest.
very, very
Exactly.
strong aspect of Syrian Christian cuisine today. So it's always an amalgamation. It's an amalgamation of cultures, and when we talk about a product like food, when you say breads, there are different kinds of breads, and when we say appam, there are different kinds of references to appam. So to say that something existed before or later is not the point. There's always the idea of innovation that's constantly happening, and
Exactly.
and the technique that is used, and then you share it with other communities, and of course it becomes popular over time.
So this is how, Tanya. Let's move to the next section of our conversation. There are by 1492, I think, or in 15th century, some changes happening in Iberian Peninsula, and that displaced large. That's reconquista was going on, and the largely displaced communities find the shelters in the Ottoman Empire or also in South India. So there was a considerable number of Arabs and also Jews who were displaced from Iberian Peninsula, and now a new community of Jews entered. One Jews, those who were residing in South Asia from thousands of the years, and these are their new nomenclature was given them, and how they influence the cuisine of Kerala in the present context.
Right. So, the first lot of Jews who came, they were referred to as the Malabari Jews, and they're darker skinned. Like you could not differentiate an Indian from a
Exactly.
Malabari Jew because they come from the regions of the Middle East. But if you look at the for that, if you still look at some of the communities which embraced Islam, and then we have the Islamic communities. They have features which are so strongly Arabic. It's unbelievable, So I would say that those distinctions are still very vivid. But the second lot of Jews came towards the 16th, 17th century from the regions of Mediterranean, and they're lighter colored. They're known as Pardesi Jews. Pardesi refers to foreigner. So anybody which was white skinned, in quotes, would be a foreigner to the locals. But the Malabari Jews were never called that. So they have, a different kind of cuisine, but not too different because the base remains the same. For example, they follow very strict laws, both communities of Jews. Kosher, for example, you don't mix milk with meat. So then they innovated it and used coconut milk. You don't find certain herbs which were found in the Mediterranean, and so you use curry leaves. So there is a lot of innovation that takes place, and it's the same with the Arabs. It's the same with the Malabari Jews. The Arabs use a lot of dates. The cooking style is very different. The kind of sweets that are made are different. But what's very interesting to find was there was the same sweet in the Arab-influenced Muslim community and the Jewish community, but with different names, but exactly the same thing.
Exactly the same.
So
So that
exactly the
you
same
want
thing.
to reflect that the Middle Eastern reflection, either coming through the Europe or either coming directly from Middle East, it was there.
Absolutely,
Only the
absolutely. All
nomenclature has been changed. Like halava, you
yeah.
told about the
There is
halava
another
item.
point, Rehan. It could also be that these communities lived very close to each other, and there was absolute harmony. There was
Absolute harmony,
they
yes.
never married one another. That's a different matter. But there was no animosity of any sort, and it is quite natural that one would absorb another's culture
Yeah.
or even recipe for that, for all you know. So even when you look at the appam, the original opos came from the Jews, and then it became appam, and then Syrian Christians made it very popular, and everybody in Kerala eats appam today. It's become a Kerala food item kind of a
Yeah, definitely.
thing. Yeah, so that's kind of how it's happened. And when we look at a place like Pocochin or Matanjeri, there are 17 different communities that resided or even continue to reside there, although some of them are not there anymore. So if we're talking about 1 square mile, and can you just imagine the kind of influences that may have occurred over the centuries. It's impossible to separate one community from the other. But like
Exactly.
I
It's
mentioned, religion keeps certain things intact, certain
yeah.
customs. Marriage, for example, it was considered very sacred, and you generally did not marry somebody from another community in those days. So those were things which kept communities distinct, but food was one aspect which I found was freely absorbed and freely shared, and it kind of kept the fabric of society together, and I think it still does, and that's the beauty of all of
Yeah.
us loving food. Yeah, for
Yeah.
example,
Still,
you're
still,
sitting in
still,
another
still.
country and I'm somewhere else, and we're talking about
Yeah,
food.
definitely. People used to come to the different places. They carry their culture and they absorb the culture of the locals. And this is how the
Absolutely.
exchange is taking place. As we saw in the present Gulf region, there is a lot of South Indians, and they brought with them dosa, they brought with them idli, and many of the Arabs I saw, they relish it.
Yeah.
South Indian
Yeah.
meals are, you can find the corners. Indians mean South Indians here in Gulf, because there is
Yes.
large number in
It
different
is a
countries.
very, very interesting aspect regarding the Arab influenced community of Muslims here is that we follow the matriarchal system in Kerala, right? So we have the Nair community which follow the matriarchal system, which was adopted by the Muslim community. So the
Oh, really?
mothers were the most important. And when you get married, the boy comes to the girl's house.
Yeah, this I came to know recently, yes, from one of the
Yes,
South Indian
which is
friends. Yes.
quite an amazing thing when you look at it. I don't think it happens anywhere else,
Yeah.
and this is a very important aspect concerning food, because when the women are the ones who are holding the reins, naturally the kitchen
Yes.
becomes very important.
Exactly.
Property is with the women. The man takes the family name of the woman of the bride, which is almost unheard of.
Yes.
So you're talking about food having a very distinct position, and
Exactly.
that's another reason why the Mapla food is so cherished, I think, here, and it's remained so beautiful. It's got so many constructs in it and so many layers in
So,
its flavors, and that's a very interesting aspect of Kerala, the Kerala Muslim community on the whole.
and exactly, you mentioned that Suleimani tea is quite popular among them. That's tea without milk. They used to say
That's right.
Suleimani tea. And that's
That's right.
again a Middle Eastern reflection, where you find that milk tea
Yeah,
is mainly favored in our part of world, or we say South Asian version. So
that's
mostly South Asian tea is most common, but they used to prefer. You use some terms, I think supra. What I need to clarify these terms. You use the term supra like a mat that they used while dining. The Malayali community. So,
yeah.
so this is exactly the mat on which they sit, or this is a tablecloth, or like a place where they put the food.
No, this is where they all sit and
They all sit.
where they eat. Yes, I had the good fortune of actually visiting a family in the Malabar region of Kerala, and they were so kind and hospitable. I cannot begin to explain how hospitable they were, and all this food was brought out, and there was a lot of sharing. And of course, the men never ate with the women. I mean, that was always the custom that was followed, and they ate in a different area. But even with the women, the kind of energy that existed within that meal. And I was amazed to know that 40 days from when a bridegroom comes to the bride's house, he's known as a Pudu Mapla, which means a new bridegroom, and he's always known as a Pudu Mapla. And there are 40 different kinds of dishes made every day. You cannot repeat anything.
40 different type of dishes.
Yes. So every day they make a different kind of dish, which is, one can only begin to fathom the kind of effort that goes in today, this generation, to do that.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of preservation. I believe it's because the women are really, the soul of the house there.
Soul of the Kusinchia or kitchen. So coming on later days, when we find the Dutch influence is also there, and then by the 17th century, I think English reflection is also there on the cuisine, especially in baking, bread making, and you use the term, I think, brother. Brother is a sort of...
brother is a Dutch bread.
That's a Dutch. Bodji came from a
Dutch bread. We still have it in certain parts of Kerala, but it's not as popular as a lot of other things. And it's eaten in a very funny combination. Either it's eaten with just plain butter, or it's eaten with mutton kurma and a banana together, which is absolutely strange. But the flavors are quite surprisingly interesting. Baking. When we talk about baking, it was the Portuguese who introduced baking. And they brought the ovens here. It's called bormas. So the traditional ovens were called bormas. And of course, when the British came, it became a little more sophisticated. And in Kerala, we don't see many Britishers having married local women, although the influence was there. And also, it's already a tight community with so many influences, and then to infiltrate that further would require a longer period of time. Of course, there are parts of Kerala which still cherish the brown stew and all of those kind of things. And there were new versions of dishes that came about. When we talk about the cuisine per se, the kind of influence that the Arabs had, or the preservation of the Jewish cuisines, and if you look distinctly at the different Christian communities which were influenced by the Portuguese or by early Christian techniques of cooking, that's very distinct.
Very distinct.
Very distinct. But baking the bread, of course, was brought by the Portuguese, and then it traveled everywhere across Kerala. And then certain bakers in Calicut region, for example, they still make the biscuits and bread which the Britishers had,
introduced.
So yes, so those things are important points, because even the Dutch, they didn't marry local women, and so we see the kind of influence being so much less. It's lesser than what the Portuguese or
so
people who
it was due to the Portuguese, their amalgamation or confluence with the local communities, their intermarriages, and how they mix with the local society has a greater impact.
And the Portuguese also had a vision to spread Catholicism, and because of that, and just like even when Islam came here, and Islam was shared with the people,
with the locals.
With the locals, then everything changes. Because we're really embracing a religion, and with that religion comes a lot of other things, customs and traditions.
And I think
when we don't eat.
And in post 87, I think Britishers were more secluded, and they are like living in a Bangalore, distinct between the Englishman and non-Englishman. So the colonial stratification avoided,
Absolutely.
This sort of outcome, what came with the Portuguese.
Yes. I think that's a very important point you brought about, because the others really didn't, weren't looked at as enemies. They were given permission to build their forts. They were given permission, and if there was any conflict, it was between the European forces, and they took sides of either the Zamrin of Calicut, which was always trying to fight the Raja of Cochin, and to, they worked within the existing politics of the region. But the British didn't do that. They were very clear
Yeah.
that there's not going to be any other Lord and Master but them. Or
Exactly.
the East
Exactly.
India Company had to come and establish itself. So that's another very important point why food, kind of reduces its impact in terms of
Exactly.
influence into the local community.
Exactly, exactly. In the part two of your book, part one is like history, heritage, and different layers you explained. And part two, you did a lot of research and you put out a variety of culinary items. And can you explain a little bit what was the idea behind it? It was wonderful, very short, crisp, and you put some remark on that. This Syrian, this is Arab, or this is Jewish,
Yeah.
and then the ingredients of that, because I think readers would
Yes.
like to know
Of
more
course.
about that part.
Um,
That's really very interesting.
So, I've only actually published a part of the recipes that were collected because we wanted to, knew we also wanted to keep the book crisp and easy to read and people to carry it with them. And there's a whole ton of recipes out there I've not even seen or heard of because it's just too many. So the main idea behind this was to one, document the recipes, because I don't know how many of the new generation, the youngsters are going to actually be taking the trouble to follow the techniques of cooking, although they're not that complicated, but certain things require a little bit of effort. The other is, after documentation, is to show how certain ingredients, almost all the ingredients for that matter, are seen repeated in recipes, but the way they come together, or the way they're married and the way they blend with each other, create very different flavors. And that's very important. And we remember that the technique the customs influence that. So using the same ingredient, you might find red chilies and ginger and garlic and all these things in the Jewish cuisine. You might find it in the Syrian Christian cuisine, or you might find it in the Latin Catholic cuisine. But the way it comes together is different,
Is slightly different,
slightly different, and that creates a completely different flavor.
and
One
that create a
ingredient shifts
distinct
and
flavor.
everything changes.
That's a point of creating a distinct flavor. So how did you research these recipes? That exactly what was the process of researching
It
these
took
recipes?
quite some time. I didn't think it would take this long,
Mm.
but because there's very little recording of food, it's always very oral
Yeah.
when it comes to, and
Yeah.
there hasn't been any recording of this particular aspect of food previously. So I visited old families where they still had their grandmothers there, and they were willing to open their old recipe books. And so I read them and I spoke to them and I understood how, one thing led to another, and so I started collecting all the recipes from the various families, and each family is of course connected to a certain religion or a community, and so I was able to then kind of fit the puzzle together and then understand how these things came about. Of course, certain things like the appam or puttu or idiyappam would have an influence, but it's commonly found across Kerala, and it's become everybody's food, which not necessarily, I've not mentioned all of them in the book, and they're very
Yeah,
common.
definitely.
But if you look at something like fish, which is very popular in Kerala because of the sea, the coastline, the way a particular fish dish is made, the name remains the same, but the flavor is completely different because the ingredients and the way it's cooked in two different communities of Christianity is different. And that's kind of amazing. It was also very evident to me because my mother and father come from two different Christian communities. And then I could really see the difference when I went to my maternal home, opposed to my paternal grandmother, whose Kusina I talk about. So that was quite obvious to me while growing up.
In the book, there are various beautiful photographs that depicting the street culture, because streets and the culture places, alleys, these are the places where the real culture is reflected. So you captured these photographs during your journey of your book writing, or it was from before you have that taken that
No,
perspective?
both. I knew also some artist friends of mine who had recorded certain streets, and I wanted those streets, so they were kind enough to share them with me.
And then
Sorry?
Sorry, and some of the communities you reflected archives like huge represent the Malabari community photograph representing Syrian Christian, representing just to depict their customs and I think their
Absolutely.
portraits. So that was a richness, or was say the rich aspect of your research, that you can
Yes,
have a
absolutely.
visual narratives what you are writing in the text. That's the point,
Yes,
I
if you
think.
look at the, if you there's a photograph of the Mapilar Muslim women. It's a black
Yeah.
and white photograph,
Yes.
and it really shows that the Muslims never cover, the women never covered themselves, and they were
Yeah.
literally very strong women because it was a matriarchal system, and that's quite a you know it's a different thing to see. And
Exactly.
obviously they would preserve their food because that's
Yeah.
their forte, and that's really who they are, right? I mean, women in those days were largely associated with food, and it's not like how it is today, where men are also very involved in the culture of food.
Yeah.
So those photographs, I think, also speak a lot to
Yeah,
show
that
that.
speaks a lot. That's a very rich aspect of your book, and I think the street photographs plus the archives that you present from the different communities, so that represent the facets of their book.
Thank you, Rehan.
So, thank you. And then coming to just like a sample of dishes like salas, you collected it from I think Mary Matthew, a Syrian Christian. In the same way, you took kevisal. It is from Malipa community, I think, from a Malabar community. So this is how they represent from the diversities of the cuisine, and in fact, your research also.
Yes, that's right. The salas is an interesting recipe because salas
Yeah.
is the word that's used for salad. And if you
Yes.
look at the recipe of salas, it's very simple. It's just onions and green chilies, and then there's coconut milk. So that's the deviation that it embraced, where coconut milk is added to salad, and it's just got some very no greens, nothing else, just a very simple onion based salad with coconut milk. But it's a very and a little vinegar, and it's a very tasty salad, because you eat that not as a salad like we have today, which becomes probably a main plate.
Course.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but this is a salad which is eaten with rice and curry.
And
So
then
it's almost a curry, but it's a salad. So those are very interesting things that I found that continues to exist
and
in this.
diverse varieties of pickles and chutneys coming up from the different communities. That's again a very
Yeah.
rich aspect of this cuisine, what I came to discover. I never have thought about it, from tamarind to juices and then chutneys and then pickles. That was really a very rich aspect of the South Indian cuisine, especially connected with the different communities.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yes. Yeah.
So
Because there are also different kinds of tamarinds, right? It's not one
yeah,
tamarind. That we
yeah,
use very strongly, we use three different kinds of tamarinds. And one
yeah.
is used in fish, and the other is used in curries, and, those kind of things. And then when you take that and you make juice with it, it becomes a completely new kind of innovation that happens.
So Tanya, I think anything for the readers you want to give a message just about your research or work? We are about to end. I think 45 minutes have passed. Really, so interesting conversation, and really many thanks for coming on our session and giving a glimpses of your book.
Thank you so much, Rehan. I would be happy if everybody bought the book. But Niyogi
Yeah,
has been absolutely supportive in this
yeah,
journey of mine. And, we write a book, or we try and document something thinking that it has to be preserved for the future, because there's so much of dis- destruction, in quotes, of heritage all across the world. And even in
exactly.
Kerala, every day we're losing something. So
We
these
are
things
losing
I
some.
can preserve, who we are as people. And it's not just about preserving my culture; it's about preserving a global culture.
Global culture, and
Yes, there's no
this is
difference.
something that celebrating the diversity with the uniqueness of amalgamation, confluences, and really what we say the harmony that
Yes,
we saw. Slowly the space is going to be narrowed down in these days of extremism all across the globe, not only in our part of the
exactly, exactly,
world.
exactly. And that's
So
what we need to celebrate. What
yes, we
used to
need to
be, what
celebrate.
it used to be like.
Yes, exactly,
And we
exactly.
really are actually reliving that memory when we
Mm,
eat the food, and we are
exactly.
remembering how people lived.
Mm.
And it's so beautiful to think about that.
and also breaking the stereotype to, as a North Indian, I'm a North Indian, brought up in North India. Whatever contact we have with the South
Absolutely.
India is very rare. In North India, South dosa is only considered as South Indian, really,
Yes.
honestly speaking. So we don't know that how rich every cuisine has their own aspect. And once we study, once we go through it, other than the interaction, then only we can know about it. So that's the
Absolutely.
beauty. That's the beauty of that part. So thank you, Tanya, and really a great conversation. I'm ending the broadcast because I didn't find any questions. Other